This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
This is René Brooks, and welcome to Distraction. I'm here with my friend who has continuously allowed me to show up on his podcast, so I couldn't close out the month without inviting the spectacular Brendan Mahan.
That's a Spider-Man adjective. I'm really excited.
Spectacular is a good descriptor.
Thank you.
It's well deserved. This is Mr. Wall of Awful. Mr. ADHD is life on hard mode. Like, Brendan continually says things about ADHD that make me go, shit, I wish I would have came up with that before he got it. He's so right. So it is a pleasure.
My favorite one was Jessica McCabe was doing her keynote a few years back at the conference. And it's 11 o'clock at night. She's prepping for her keynote, and I'm sitting there listening to it. She's going through it, and then she goes, and sometimes the ADHD wins. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, yeah, I got that from Eric Tivers. I'm like, Eric Tivers got that from me. So
wait, these people are just out here stealing, and I don't have to, like, I could have just stole it. I mean, I'm joking, joking, audience. This is really sarcasm. That is not stealing. That is honoring the people who do other work.
Yeah, and the whole idea of sometimes the ADHD wins, right, which we just got to organically, but is right in line with what we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
I don't want to keep that, right? Like, I kind of want credit because it's a cool thing to say.
Oh, yeah.
But I want everybody in the ADHD world to have that and to, like, own that and to be able to sit back and go, oh, hey, you know what? Today my ADHD won, and that doesn't mean I lose forever.
Exactly.
My whole thinking behind that phrase is, once I say sometimes the ADHD wins, like I admit that the ADHD has won, now the battle starts anew and I might win this next one, right? Like I've got a new round. And that to me is the benefit, is it externalizes the struggle. It gives me permission to have struggled and lost, and it lets me kind of reset for the next efforts to overcome this disorder in the moment.
Coming back to your superhero status here, sometimes for an episode or two, the villain is winning.
Mm-hmm.
But Superman, Spider-Man, Batman is still the hero.
Yeah.
And they still prevail in the end.
Right. You can't quit.
And we never even question for a minute that they're still the hero, even though they've temporarily got this challenge going on that they are trying to figure a way out of. And that's the thing, right? Because we know it's a challenge and we know they're going to get around it. We don't doubt that for a minute.
Right. And we have to take that same perspective on ourselves.
Bingo.
And as a guy who grew up on comics, right? I literally majored in comics in college. That's how much of a comic book nerd I am.
Yes.
I internalize that message deeply, right? Like I'm the guy who just keeps moving forward, and it served me really well in my life. It's helped me manage my ADHD in a lot of ways, right? I have 2 master's degrees. There's not a lot of people with ADHD who can say that. And it's because I just kept going and I kept trying and I adapted and changed and pivoted when I needed to, but I kept moving forward. So, I mean, that's the lesson I hope to instill in my kids. That's the lesson I keep pointing out to my wife because she keeps doing it, but doesn't always realize that she's doing it. Like, it's kind of the essentialness of being human is you're always moving forward. The trick is, do we want to be moving forward in survival mode or do we want to be moving forward in thriving mode?
That's the part.
And once we recognize that even in survival mode, we're still moving forward, we can start to pivot out of survival mode and move forward into something a little more healthy.
And I think that's the real story for most of us, like these people that you see who are well-known or leaders or whatever you want to consider us within the community. If you had to pick a defining characteristic that unites us all, it's that we see the challenges and go, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know what the answer is, but the pursuit of the answer is something that we're all collectively devoted to. We might all find the answers via a different path, but the idea of sitting down and washing our hands of it and being resigned to just survival is not something that any of us have been willing to do, and that's why we keep finding more answers,
Right.
and the
Yeah, and
answers
it's
change as you move along.
yeah, and kind of selfishly a little bit, right? The answers are as much for us as they are for our audience, our clients, the people that we serve, right? Like
Oh, they're
we're
always for me first. It's like
yeah,
I'm ground zero. I'm like that. We were just talking about that water bottle the other
you
day.
got to make sure they work first.
Yeah. Like that water bottle, I wasn't looking for a water bottle to put in the store. I was looking to find a way to take my own damn meds more consistently. And I saw that and was like, oh, that's going to be everything for me. Oh, hey, wait a minute. Yeah. I got that store. I bet it'll be helpful for everybody else too. Let me throw it in there. But it was for me first. Guard Your Yes was for me first. You know, like I'm sure Wall of Awful was for you first.
It wasn't. It wasn't.
Okay.
Most of my stuff is, but that particular one, it ended up being a huge benefit for me. But where it started, the secret origin of the Wall of Awful, is I was working with a client.
Yeah.
So I'm in their kitchen, and the mom is like, I just don't understand why he can't do his homework. And I go, it's sort of like there's this wall of awful between him and his homework. And then my brain, you know how the ADHD brain, like every now and then it like splits into two parts and you continue with the conversation.
Yes.
But this back part is like, you just said something really smart and you got to figure out what that is. Yeah, that happened. It was like singing and alarm bells and
Yes, like the secret origin of the Wall of Awful is totally like somebody needs to draw you as like a comic page, and that needs to be the title of like the secret origin of the Wall of Awful. I'm so excited. That would look so cool.
and that's totally another comic thing because DC used to have secret origins. That was the name of the book. That was about their superheroes. So I completely, that is a superhero
Stop.
comic thing. Yeah, that's where I got that phrase.
All right, look, we need to make this happen, Bren. I'm going to talk to somebody about it. Okay, now I've completely lost the thread. Don't mind me. I'm jumbled. We were talking
That's all right.
about you like the stimulants are going. Like I think I scared the last little bit of stimulant out of my system by knocking all that stuff over.
And that's totally okay, right? Because that's one of the things we talked about before we started recording was how I think it's important for us or we both think it's important for us as content creators, I guess leaders in the ADHD field, to normalize it for the folks who don't think about ADHD all day, every day, and to
Yes.
talk about how like we struggle too, and the stuff that we do naturally to make it normal, so we're not carrying that emotional burden of shame as much. We obviously still carry it, just less.
Yes.
If we can share that stuff, I think it's important and valuable to help people who have ADHD that don't think about things in the way we do to put some of the burden down.
Well, and that's it. It's like I feel like when we're first diagnosed, we think, okay, I'm going to put these skills together and I'm going to take this medication or attempt like we're looking for like the secret item that's going to like make everything click, and then it'll be like we'll be like the people who don't have ADHD. And that's not a thing. And I don't think that's something that you realize until after you've worn yourself out trying to make that happen. And I think the people around us when we're in, like, and of course I'm only speaking to being diagnosed as an adult just because that's my experience, but you know, of course at first I was like, hey everybody, I've got ADHD, and that's, you know, why all of these things that happen, and they're like, oh great, so now you can fix that, that's awesome. Like, wait a minute, you're not fixing it. And I'm like, oh no, I'm not, am I? What am I supposed to do about that? And then eventually it was through receiving ADHD coaching that my coach was like, that's not a thing. And I was like, oh, are you sure that's not a thing? And she was like, no, you're always going to have the ADHD. Like, even when you're like, when you're medicated, you have it. When you're not medicated, you have it. Like, eternally, this is going to be your experience. It's not going anywhere. So you just need to know like how to work around that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and once I knew that, I think that's what makes it so hard. That's where all the angst comes from. It's that you think it's not going away, even now that I have the answer and I know what I'm supposed to do to so-called solve it. And it makes you feel doubly damaged or broken or incapable because you're like, look at all these other people who know that they have ADHD and they're doing the things and they're successful. Yeah, we are successful, and partially because we're like, hey, look, you need to give me a range. If you told me 3 o'clock, I might be there at 3:10, but I'll be there. Is that cool? Everyone who comes to a meeting with me knows that that's a possibility because I make sure that they know up front. This is an inevitable part of working with me. You good with that? If you're not good with that, that might mean that we're not the right people to work with each other. And that's not a reflection on either one of us. Neither one of us are bad people. It's just not a good fit. And that's something that no one teaches us to tell people up front because we're too busy thinking, I'm the problem, I'm bad, so I need to come in here with my hat in my hands all the time and just apologize. Whereas you can just notify people up front. Here's what I need. Here's how that works for me. Here's how this could potentially affect you. Are you cool with this affecting this your way? You need to do your own cost benefit analysis to figure out if that's something you can deal with. That doesn't have anything to do with me. Enjoy, no hard feelings either way. See if when you come back to me with a decision.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that makes it hard to even own up to that is how much moralization goes with ADHD, right? Like so many of the challenges that
Bingo.
ADHD provide to us are moralized.
Correct.
If you're late, you don't care. If you forget, you don't care. You're lazy. You don't like value other people and those sorts of things, right? Like if I were to forget my wife's birthday, which I haven't ever, but who knows, right?
Thank God.
If I were to forget my wife's birthday, yeah, it doesn't mean I don't love her. I tell my wife I love her multiple times a day. Does not mean I don't love her. It just means I have ADHD. That's all that means.
Yes.
If I double book myself between friends and family, that just means I have ADHD. If I'm 10 minutes late, it just means I have ADHD, right? When I do workshops, sometimes I fake one and sometimes it's real, but I'll like pretend I have an asthma attack, right? Unless it's a real asthma attack, and then it's a real asthma attack. But usually I'm faking it. And I do my inhaler, right? And then, or I pretend to do my inhaler. And then I apologize to everyone in the audience for being too lazy and unmotivated to breathe. It always gets a laugh because that's ridiculous, right?
Yes.
But then I pivot and I flip it and I'm like, why is it okay for me to have asthma and it's ridiculous that I'm too lazy and unmotivated to breathe? But if your kid isn't doing their homework and they have ADHD, it's somehow because they're too lazy and unmotivated. They're both disorders. They're both disabilities. One we give permission to because it's physical. The other we don't because it's mental.
That's it. That's it. Like, it's funny because what do I call it? I call it the morality of memory.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I care intensely about that I will not remember. And it's very distressing because we're all socialized to think of it the same way. So even we believe that until we learn that it's not factual. Like, your brain is like a computer. Either it has the pieces to work the way it's supposed to work. Some of them are look, I'm sitting here like this is not a good analogy. This is not going to be a good feel. But I'm like, some of the pieces are corrupted. Whatever. Like, those are not bad pieces. They just don't function the way we want them to function. And so what do? We yank those.
Yeah.
We put pieces in. And for us, those pieces are supports. They're skills. They're, there's Alexa to scream at me and let me know that it's time to come meet with my friends and do the podcast. There's medication. There's notifications on my phone. There's all these pieces that I can add in to support me in the places that I need to be supported. But even with the best support system, I still have ADHD, and it's still going to get jacked up for no other reason than the fact that I have ADHD. Maybe I silenced the notification too soon. Maybe I forgot to set the alarm in the first place. Maybe my emotional regulation is off, and that always sends my entire day into a tailspin. Maybe I have to cancel things. I don't know. But like, I think that we feel like once we get this ADHD thing under control, everything is going to go perfectly. And we don't ever stop to think even neurotypical people's lives don't go perfectly just because they have good executive function. Life still happens.
Right.
So it, like, even by function, like it might not even have anything to do with our ADHD that day. It could just be that shit happened because that's what happens.
Yeah.
You know, when you're used to thinking things are your fault, it's always going to be your fault to you.
Yeah. And jumping into that, like it might not even be ADHD, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I've been habitually reminding people of is, ladies and gentlemen, we are still living through a global pandemic. And the fact that we are living through a global pandemic is having significant impacts on our mental health, regardless of whether we have ADHD or not, regardless of whether we're neurodiverse or neurotypical. It's intense and it's wearing on everyone's capacity to manage their emotions and regulate themselves and remember to do the thing and want to do the thing and self motivate and disconnect from less healthy habits in order to engage in more healthy habits. All of that stuff is occurring because, due to the nature of this global pandemic, to some degree, we're all in survival mode because we're trying to survive a global pandemic. And that in my mind can't be stated often enough, because so many people are trying to live life like it's normal when it isn't. It's a new normal kind of, but it's still weird and unique for all of us.
Yes. And it's like, it's almost like in the post vaccine era, we're like, oh, we got the vaccine. Now things are normal and we can move around again. We really can't. And just like you said, I think we need life to be normal so bad that we're trying to convince ourselves that it is, but it's still not. So we're kind of living in this age of denial where we're like, okay, some of us can move around normally, so I guess that's cool. Things are back to normal. And therefore, this huge list of expectations that I have for myself needs to be back in place. Like, I had this huge, like, content plan the other day, and I was like, okay, well, like, you know how it is, Bren, when you're like, you've got goals, for different things you put into place. And I'm like, look at this compared to what you had planned for the year. Oh, this is kind of crappy. Like, have you really been doing what you were supposed? And I had to stop myself and be like, are you crazy? Maintenance is more than good enough right now. Growth, if it happens, cool. If it's not happening right now, that shouldn't have been my goal right now anyway.
Yeah,
We are in the middle of, like, not only are we in a global pandemic, some of us are in personal crisis too. Hello.
right. Yeah, my dad's been sick for a while now, and I'm part of his care team. And
Yes.
being part of his care team means my life gets disrupted a little bit. My day to day, I should say, gets disrupted. Instead of having like 4 days to get stuff, or 5 days to get stuff done, I kind of have four, because my Fridays are devoted to my dad, either because I'm taking him for treatments or because I'm just going to hang out with him because he's sick and struggling and he needs companionship. And that matters. That's important. So
Yep.
I will go and do that because my dad matters more to me than whether or not I grow my business.
Yeah.
And last year during COVID, for the whole school year, I homeschooled my kids. And I didn't homeschool them like they had virtual school and I sat there and watched them do it. I created the curriculum, I executed the curriculum, I assessed the curriculum. Coming out of that, I hit, and might be a good thing for folks to know about, I hit that, like, the ADHD hangover when you've been really productive and doing a whole lot of stuff, and then that stops and you hit that transition period. Don't expect to go from one significant event to another like that. Like, you need transition time. And it took me probably a month to really recover from the level of intensity that I was going at for a year plus. And now I'm mostly balanced again.
Dude, I have hit that wall and it has been several months.
Yeah. And that's totally valid.
Like to the point where I was like, no, really, like like to the point where it almost starts to scare you. Like, have I really gone too far this time?
Mm-hmm.
Like, did I really push too hard this time? Is it not going to come back? Like,
Yep.
is this a thing? Like, am I just going to be stuck for forever now? Like, did I overdo it to the degree that I'm not going to rebound? Which
Right.
fortunately has never happened, but who's to say it can't?
I thought about it a lot like going to a conference. So when I go to a conference,
Yeah.
I take at least 1, maybe 2 days where the plan is to not do anything. It's like you're just taking these days off because conferences are intense.
Yep.
And I took that same perspective once my boys had finished, like homeschooling was over. They did some summer camp stuff, but also a lot of it was me. So once they went back to school and I had officially 6-7 hours a day where I didn't have to be responsible for anyone besides myself, I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to take at least 2 weeks. It ended up being a month of time to transition. I still met with clients. I still did the podcast, but beyond that, I wasn't trying to do much. I did sign people up for the parent coaching groups, but I wasn't actively chasing anything new. I wasn't like, now I should write that book now that I have time. Part of my brain wanted me to do that, but I resisted it because I knew that was a recipe for further burnout.
Right. Thank God you knew. Brendan, where can people find you? I'm so glad you came.
I am too, yeah. So folks can find me at ADHDessentials.com, and the podcast is the same name, ADHD Essentials. And I hope they found this conversation valuable and useful.
It's always valuable and useful when we talk, even if it only is valuable and useful to us.
True.
Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our producer is Sarah Gurton. I'm René Brooks. You can find me at blackgirllostkeys.com and on Twitter at BLKGirlLostKeys. Until next time.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.